Blackmagic Design recently released the BMPCC 6K Pro camera. It's an upgraded version of the 6K model. The Pro version has some new features, and people have been raving about the in-camera ND system. But do ND filters really matter? Today we're gonna talk about why NDs are very dispensable and how to use them correctly. But first, a question. Are you using them correctly? When you shoot videos without owning a set of NDs, go get them now. Oh no, wait. You should get them after watching this episode, because you don't want to miss what I'm going to tell you next. If you have seen my last video on how to get the proper exposure, you should know ND filters are the most effective way to control your exposure. This is the number one reason, because when you shoot videos, you can't rely on aperture and shutter speed to control the exposure. You can't change ISO too much either, because it may bring noises. If you ever shoot an exterior on a sunny day, the ND filters are the only tool you can use to knock down the enormous light if you want to maintain a shallow depth of field. ND filters are labeled either with stops or optical density numbers, such as ND.3, which means cutting one stop of light, ND.6 cuts 2 stops of light, and so on. So you need to understand some basic of exposure calculation if you want to use them more precisely. Using the light meter is the most straightforward. If you are using camera's light meter, I recommend to set the spot metering and point it to your subject's face. Then you will have the right exposure for your subject. The common way to use the ND filter is to buy the screw-on filters and put it on your lens like other filters you may know. But this is not a flexible option. First, you need a set of NDs like 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, and 1.2. These are already 4 filters. Then you have the multiple lenses with multiple front diameters. You need to buy another set or step ring to adapt the filters on your other lenses. Step rings are easy to bend, so you might have to consider using the brass one. Anyway, screw-on filters are cheaper but not flexible to use. Another option is to use variable ND. It's a screw-on ND filter that allows you to adjust the light manually by rotating it. However, I don't recommend using the variable ND, and why? I'll explain later. Most professional shooters use a matte box for the filter. A matte box is usually compatible with square and rectangle filters, or 4x4 and 4x5.6 filters. It's very flexible because the matte box is designed to work on all kinds of lenses. The downside of a matte box is usually big, and high-end brands are expensive. One of the biggest things you need to be aware of when using ND is because some NDs might have a color tint, usually a dark greenish tint, which can be easily noticed on the darker NDs, like 0.9 or 1.2. And over. It's pretty much will 100% happens on cheap filter or cheap brands. So the test is required if you plan to use them. You can create a color profile by shooting a color chart with the filter and without. Then correct the footage with the filter in the post and save the correction as a preset file. High-end NDs usually don't have such issue. Some brands have put so many technologies in it to recreate a zero color shift image, like RHOdium ND made by Schneider. Like this one. Or a newcomer manufacturer, Nisi. These filters not only provide almost no color shift, but also no sharpness loss or flares. Of course, they are pricey but give you the best color fidelity. Another thing you need to pay attention is whether you need an IR-ND. The IR-ND is a combination of an ND and an IR filter, aka hot mirror. The IR means infrared, means this kind of ND reflects the infrared and prevents it from coming into the sensor. The digital sensor can capture some far-red spectrum, accumulating heat in the sensor, resulting in noises and leaving a reddish tint on the footage. The good news is the recently manufactured digital cameras, whether cinema or mirrorless, usually have a hot mirror installed. But I will still try to use an IR-ND if possible to prevent any unwanted infrared pollutions. Okay, let's talk about some tips when using the ND filter. First, I will try my best to use one filter instead of combining two to cut down more stops. Because the sharpness loss and in-filter refraction are inevitable when you put an extra piece of glass in front of the lens. So to minimize the effect, use fewer filters as you can. Second, you can put a gradient ND into consideration if you shoot sunny exteriors. It will help you tint the sky and give you a high dynamic range over your footage. The gradient ND will only decrease the brightness of the upper half of your image, where your sky usually is, and leave the bottom half unchanged. And you can also use it in a creative way to put the glass upside down or at an angle. There are tons of examples of using gradient NDs in this film. You should watch it if you're interested in it. My last suggestion is try not to use variable ND. It looks like it's really perfect for running on shoot, but I think flexibility is the only advantage of using it. Because variable ND is basically two polarizers put together. It has a strong color tint, making the biggest problem when using it. The polarizer is best for removing glares and reflections because it allows the light to put through from a certain angle, and light with the other angles like glares or reflections would be attenuated. When you put two polarizers together, the polarization is gone, but the light still comes in from an angle. This will result in an X-shaped vignette on your footage as well. You see, this is the nature of a variable ND, so there's no brand can produce one without such artifacts. Therefore, I always avoid using variable ND unless you have a very tight budget or lack assistant or time. Now you know why a camera has a built-in ND is such a big deal. In the next video, I will continue to talk about other types of filters and tell you why they are my secret weapons. So stay tuned and see you in the next video.